I just want to make sure that I don't, I got it right.
It is. This is our last class because we're, the people have reached the promised land, and
Yay.
well, they still have to go back for another 40 years, but we'll look at that next time, or we'll do something different. But we're ending today. Really what we started after Pesach, which is when they were at the Red Sea, and we've been talking about what was in their minds and the slave mentality, and how they from the beginning were saying, take us back to Egypt, and then they traveled on and they went to Sinai, and we've been following them as they've been traveling, and finally we just started last week as they arrived, and they sent out the spies, and we started to talk about, well, wait a second, what was so bad about the spies? Like, why did this happen? Why was this like the defining worst event ever, that God punished them with such a severe punishment? And I think it links into everything we've been talking about since the beginning. And the big question is like, really, what did they do? This is Ramban, I think, but he asked, what was so bad? Moses said to them, go see, is it a good land or is it not a good land? Are the people strong or not strong? And they came back and said, it's a good land. The people are very strong. So where was the issue with it? And where did it all go wrong? And there's actually a very interesting conjunction here, because Tisha B'Av, right? The 9th of Av is Saturday night. And that's the day where all the bad things happen to the Jewish people. And the traditional belief is that this thing happened on Tisha B'Av, right? The spies gave the report on Tisha B'Av, or the day before Tisha B'Av. And then, so we're in the perfect place in the Jewish calendar to talk about this, because this is with the Tisha B'Av coming up, it's a time when we think about, when human beings make the wrong decisions and it leads to bad places. And what is it? What is it? Is it the mistakes, or what is it about what we do that leads us sometimes to disaster? And what can we do to prevent that from happening? Anybody have any thoughts or anything left over from last week, or anything they wanted to share?
The spies being sent out, who wanted to know? Was it Moses who didn't know, or God didn't know? I mean, I'm sort of confused about this. Or was there some other reason to send out the spies? Was the spies just sort of the filmy front of something else that's going on with that?
Interesting. And this is the difference between the account in the book of Numbers and the account in the book of Deuteronomy that comes right later in the Torah. But here it seems to be Moses who says, send out the spies. But we know, right? We know it's a good land. So why is he sending out the spies? We thought it must be for a military operation. You send out spies to get the layout of the land. But in the book of Deuteronomy, it's different. Moses says, you asked me to send out the spies. So it seems to be some hesitancy from the people, right? The people are hesitant, and they want, give me a guarantee, right? Which can be seen as a loss of faith, right? They're asking for a guarantee that they can take the land. Well, maybe they should have just gone in, believed God, made the earth and did incredible wonders in Egypt. Why couldn't he do the same here? Why did they need spies to check it out?
They watched how God dealt with the Egyptian armies before. So why wouldn't he continue to watch over them?
Yeah, exactly. Why did they need these spies? And
they have short memories.
God, the only thing I can think of, which is a strange thing, is that God maybe is trying to get to know the perception of the people. And in fact, in a new situation, so he sends out the spies. So God doesn't know up front what the spies are going to tell him. He's still working on trying to get into the heads, the experience, the perception of the people. Now, why he would be upset if they found what they found, I'm not sure. But the whole thing doesn't make any rational sense at all.
What about the fact, though, that the journey was difficult, right? And that sometimes people get very worn down, and that perhaps they begin to question or not have the loyalty to Moses and also to God out of just being so tired.
I think that's a really great point, because in Egypt, they don't have any negative experience. I mean, they're slaves, but God just comes and does all these miracles and takes them out, and everything's good. But suddenly they're traveling through the desert, and God keeps getting angry at them. And it's not like God, right? If God, the moment they left Egypt, had given them water without them asking, had given them food without them asking, had just completely taken care of them without them having to do anything, if they'd been riding on a air-conditioned bus that God created, and there was somebody delivering, 3 times a day, the doors would open, somebody would come, and then another person would come and give them a massage when their shoulders were hurting. They would stop at the sites and
Sounds
go
good.
for a little bit of exercise, right? But that wasn't what it was like, right? It was not an easy travel. So maybe you're right. Maybe they've lost some of their faith in God, giving them precisely everything they need, and maybe they're just worn out. Traveling through the desert is a hard thing at any time.
I mean,
Never
don't we
mind.
know people that do that? Something bad happens in their life and they blame God. God, why did you do that to me? I hear this multiple times.
So what's the teaching with the spies? Why were these people punished? What's the teaching here? What should we learn from this?
Mhm.
And should we learn that we shouldn't be curious, that under all circumstances, faith in God, whatever that means, is going to bring us through every situation? Is that what we should learn?
I think that's exactly the question we should be entering with, and we'll see. I think it's not. I don't think that the simple meeting, the way you just one reads the story, is that God expected them to just go in. I think it seems to me more like this was just somehow part of the plan, and something went wrong. And that's the lesson, is what went wrong. And that's, I think, what we should be looking at. What went wrong, at what point, and what were the combinations of factors? Because this was not the plan. I think this is one thing we can say, this is not the plan. They should have entered the land right now, but they didn't. So what went wrong? And let's look at that. Okay. Let's see. So we're gonna read a fair bit, because I want to go over what we read from last time, just so that we're clear. Actually, we're going to skip all the names, because that's just a little bit long. But we're going to read through, and then we're going to start to look at those questions. And for whatever reason, it's not allowing me to share what I want to share. So I'm just going to try one other thing. Here we go. Okay, Alan, do you mind reading for us? This is where
Sure.
we're just verses down. When Moses sent them to scout the land.
When Moses sent them to scout the land of Canaan, he said to them, "Go up there into the Negev and on into the hill country, and see what kind of country it is. Are the people who dwell in it strong or weak, few or many? Is the country in which they dwell good or bad? Are the towns they live in open or fortified? Is the soil rich or poor? Is it wooded or not? And take pains to bring back some of the fruit of the land." Now it happened to be the season of the first ripe grapes. They went up and scouted the land from the wilderness of Zin to Rehob at Lebo Hamath. They went up into the Negev and came to Hebron, where lived Ahiman, Sheshai, and Talmai, the Anakites. Now Hebron was founded 7 years before Zoan of Egypt. They reached the Wadi Eshcol, and there they cut down a branch with a single cluster of grapes. It had to be borne on a carrying frame by 2 of them, and some pomegranates and figs. That place was named the Wadi Eshkol because of the cluster that the Israelites cut down there. At the end of 40 days, they returned from scouting the land. They went straight to Moses and Aaron and the whole Israelite community at Kadesh in the wilderness of Paran. And they made their report to them and to the whole community as they showed them the fruit of the land. This is what they told him. We came to the land you sent us to. It does indeed flow with milk and honey, and this is the fruit. However, the people who inhabit the country are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the Anakites there. Anakites dwell in the Negev region. Hittites, Jebusites, and Amorites inhabit the hill country. And Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the Jordan. Caleb hushed the people before Moses and said, let us by all means go up and we shall gain possession of it, for we shall surely overcome it. But the other men who had gone up with him said, we cannot attack that people, for it is stronger than we. Thus they spread calumnies among the Israelites about the land they had scouted, saying, the country that we traversed and scouted is one that devours its settlers. All the people that we saw in it are of great size. We saw the Nephilim there. The Anakites are part of the Nephilim. And we looked like grasshoppers to ourselves, so we must have looked to them. The whole community broke into loud cries, and the people wept that night. All the Israelites railed against Moses and Aaron. If only we had died in the land of Egypt, the whole community shouted at them. Or if only we might die in this wilderness. Why is Adonai taking us to that land to fall by the sword? Our wives and children will be carried off. It would be better for us to go back to Egypt. And they said to one another, let us head back for Egypt. Then Moses and Aaron fell on their faces before all the assembled congregation of the Israelites. And Joshua, son of Nun, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh, of those who had scouted the land, rent their clothes and exhorted the whole Israelite community. The land that we traversed and scouted is an exceedingly good land. If pleased with us, Adonai will bring us into that land, a land that flows with milk and honey, and give it to us. Only you must not rebel against Adonai. Have no fear then of the people of the country, for they are our prey. Their protection has departed from them, but Adonai is with us. Have no fear of them. As the whole community threatened to pelt them with stones, the presence of Adonai appeared in the tent of meeting to all the Israelites.
Okay, so we're going to stop there. Very dramatic, right?
Yeah.
Very, very dramatic. And we stop at the end where suddenly the big boss is coming, right? We've been arguing, and it's powerful to see the two spies try to stop it, right? First, Caleb tries to nip it in its bud, and he starts to say, no, we can do this, but then it starts. So just reading this, what happened?
I see fear and misinformation. One, because all this information that the others started to put out, I didn't get any sense of there was that much fear early on when they were actually in the land and going through. And I'm thinking, were they just cowards and just didn't want to bother with this since they're former slaves and they don't want to have to act in any proactive way. And so they're saying these things, and then this innate fear of people from the unknown just feeds on that misinformation. And we know even to this day what that can make happen. So those are the two things that really stand out for me. It's just this feeding on
What's
fear.
the misinformation part? What's the misinformation?
It's, I think despite what they were saying, it's like we were like grasshoppers and blah, blah, blah. Why weren't we told that they had that understanding of the land when we hear the story about they're going through and casing it out, right? And I'm wondering, it's like, oh, no, we don't really want to do this. So we're going to start just rabble rousing and telling people just how awful it is and get everybody's like
some kind of group bad
group think and also kind of, I guess I would think like fundamental cowardice to go into the unknown.
Yeah.
You know, that's at least I was just, wow. It's like to this day we have it going on. It's like, it's amazing.
Thank you.
For 40 years, the Israelites, if I remember all that we've been reading, have been told after they leave Egypt, you're going to go to the promised land.
Well, this is before the 40 years. This is at the end of 1 year, right?
Oh, this is the end of 1 year. Okay.
It's after 1 year to get here. And because of this, we'll read, if God willing, we'll read more later on. But after this, God is so unhappy with them that he says, you're all going to die in the desert because you're not worthy. And so you have to spend 40 years in the desert. So,
okay, sorry.
No problem. Anybody else have any other thoughts reading this?
Maybe the point that I was thinking is, even for the year, they were told you're going to go to the promised land.
Yes.
And I don't remember them being told, or were they, that you're going to have to go and fight for it, or was it they were given the impression, at least, you're just going to go and march into the land and it's going to be yours. So I'm wondering if, yes, they were given misinformation, but it may have been misinformation that ran right to what they had been fed or led to believe or believed, during that first year of the after the Exodus.
I think that's a super interesting point, because there is a sense of them having to conquer, but clearly they're not expecting they weren't expecting what they saw, right? This was much more overwhelming. And maybe this is part of that slave mentality we've seen since the beginning, but the moment anything goes wrong, they begin to freak out. Maybe that's right. They come to the sea and there's no way to cross it, and suddenly they're saying, take us back to Egypt. And they don't have food, and they're suddenly like, take us back to Egypt. And they don't have meat, and they're saying, take us back to Egypt. So it's a reoccurring, they don't deal very well with, they're overwhelmed, or somehow their psyche is not dealing well with information with reality that doesn't conform to what they'd hoped. Maybe they thought they were going to have to conquer it, but they didn't realize it's going to be a big job. It's going to take tremendous amount of effort, and maybe it wouldn't. Maybe if God was on their side, it wouldn't take, even though. But they're just looking at those fortified cities and the stature of their enemy, and they're just freaking. They are panicking and freaking out, right?
And didn't believe that God would continue to provide for them, and he has every step of the way.
So maybe God's point is the only thing to be feared is God. There's nothing else to be feared. Is that the teaching?
Yeah.
I mean, there are lots of people who actually believe that too.
Mm-hmm. Well, in the Talmud, this is a little bit different, but it says everything is preordained. The only thing you can choose to have is fear of God or not. So in the sense, the fate is already decided. All what you can decide is, are you going to fear everything that's happening to you, or are you going to fear God, right? That's a very kind of traditional, also, way of looking at it. I think there may be other ways, but that does seem to be part of the lesson. And the traditional, you talked about the lesson earlier, the traditional lesson from here is that God felt the people simply did not have it in them to do what they needed to do, right? The people, at this point, they showed an utter failure of what everybody's been talking about, of trust, and God just lost hope that they had it in them to do what they needed to do. Because God still needed them to conquer the land and to build up the land and to do all those things. And he just said, these people, they almost could do it, but they couldn't do it. And that's a really sad idea. I mean, we talked about this the whole time, but in Egypt, God was not testing the Jewish people. God was testing the Egyptian people. Once they left Egypt, God began to test the Jewish people, and it didn't always go well, right? The Jewish people were not good at being tested. But God was trying to train them as a child, as a, however you want to look at it. And this was an important, perhaps an important test that if you want to look at it as a test.
I'm wondering too, if the fear they had in Egypt was the fear of the known. They know what they needed to be afraid of in terms of their masters. And here they had fear of the unknown, which I'm thinking like for a lot of people, it can be more paralytic than the fear of the known.
Definitely.
Yeah. Well, the fear of the known takes some kind of a predetermined shape. So it fits into some kind of a structure that you've thought of before, or some sort of a form that you can imagine. The fear of the unknown is the eruption into your being of something that's completely undefined. That's what would be an extreme fear of the unknown. And it's hard for me to imagine that there aren't a lot of people who'd be a little who'd show a little bit of cowardice with that kind of thing. So what? Yeah, no.
It's hard. It's hard to see this story the way it unravels in every level, because you can understand the people a little bit. Norma was saying they're worn out, they're tired, they've had to travel across the whole desert, they've left Egypt, they're just slaves, and suddenly they're looking at it and they have to now defeat an army of giants. They're fortified and they're not soldiers. How are they going to do this? So it's I feel for them a little bit, let's go into the commentaries a little bit. We'll see how they dissect the different moments and where it all kind of went wrong. And I think it's quite interesting. So first, I'll just read this one. This is just even before we read, but all of them were men. And when the word anashim, men, is used in scripture, Rashi says a term denoting worthiness. These men, though they later sinned, but at that time when they were appointed, they were worthy men. Right? And Sforno says the same thing. So these were not bad people. These are not bad people. That's the sense. The scouts who went out were what they were supposed to be. They were chieftains and leaders from among the people. They were men of valor, as Sforno says. That's something that happens. We see a lot in the Torah when it says anashim. There's this 4 different words for people in the Torah, and there's a lot of midrashic material on the difference. And then I think there probably is, though maybe it's a little overread in the midrash, some point to how the Torah is using these words. But these are from the pshat of the Torah. These are good people to go out. And then I'm going to read this Ibn Ezra 2. And they went, this informed us that they did not go to their tents, which were in the camp. They immediately went to Moses and Aaron and all the congregations. So when they returned, they didn't go to their tents to digest their travels of 40 days. They went straight away in the heat of their moment to the people and to Moses and Aaron to make their report. And there's a lot of criticism from the commentators that they should have taken a breath before they started to talk. because that led to the loss of control that we were talking about and how they did it.
Or they could have shared with the Caleb and Joshua, who had a different opinion of, of what they saw.
Or they could have gone straight to Moses and Aaron only and not gone to the whole camp, right? That would have been a better way. Maybe spies usually don't go tell everybody. That's a very kind of unusual spy. Spies go to the leaders and let them know. You try and control information. Spying is all about, getting hidden information. So you don't want to go, and once you tell everybody, then it's the spy. That seems to be not a good way of reporting information. So now let's go to Ramban, and he's going to continue with some of the thoughts we had from last time. Someone would like to read for us, Ramban.
And surely it floureth with milk and honey, since Moses had commanded them to see what the land is, whether it is fat or lean. The spies reported to him that it is fat, and surely it floureth with milk and honey. And in answer to his question whether there are trees therein or not, they reported to him, and this is its fruit, for so he had commanded them to show it to him. Now in all this, they said the truth and gave a report about those matters which they had been commanded. Therefore, they should indeed have said that the people that dwell in the land are fierce and the cities are fortified. For it was their duty to bring back words of truth to them that sent them, and Moses had commanded them whether they are strong or weak, and what cities they are that dwell in, whether in camps or in strongholds. But the wickedness of the spies consisted in saying the word Ephes. Nevertheless, the people that dwell in the land are fierce, which signified something negative and beyond human capability, something impossible of achievement under any circumstances, similar to the expressions.
We can stop this one here. Yeah, we can stop here. It's just, they're just going to go and kind of look at other places. But let's go down to where it says the last 4 sentences, thus the spies.
Okay, thus the spies told Moses that land is fertile, and surely it floureth with milk and honey, and the fruits are good. But it is impossible to fight against the people because they are fierce, and the cities are fortified and very great. And moreover, we saw that the children of Anak there.
So down to one word, right? Nevertheless.
Yeah.
It wasn't in the report of them saying what they saw, but it was their interpretation of what they saw and how they, how they brought it to the people. The nevertheless, it's a great land, but the second you see use the word but, right? If they use the word and, it's going to be hard to take it. But instead of they use the word nevertheless, it's going to be the people are strong. Yeah. Anybody else have any thoughts? Okay, so let's go a little bit further. Now we have, because they have a series, right? What we read, the spies have a series of comments which are negative. They're stronger than us. It's a land that eats its inhabitants. We were as grasshoppers in their sights, right? Those are 3 very negative judgments of your report, right? If they only given the report to Moses and Aaron, and then Moses and Aaron stopped them from saying those words, maybe it'd be even better. But what does Rashi say? And it's a land that eateth up it's the inhabitants thereof. Bonnie, do you want to continue?
They eat up the inhabitants thereof. In every place which we passed, we found them, the inhabitants, burying their dead. But as a matter of fact, the Holy One, blessed be He, did this, caused many deaths among them at the time, and so the Canaanites were engaged in burying their dead for the best, in order to occupy them busily with their mourning, so that they should pay no attention to the spies.
But very interesting comment, right? So they say this is a land that eats up its inhabitants, right? This is like But what Rashi is saying, well, actually, God caused all these people to die to make the spies' journey easier, not to scare them that it was a land that killed a lot of people. So they were totally misinterpreting, right? Going back to that misinformation. The people are misinterpreting what they're seeing in the land. They're like, this is a horrible land where people are dying. No, God caused that to happen to help you travel through.
You could look at it as they misinterpreted, or you could look at it as, God did something and it backfired.
Yeah, that's true too. Yep. Yeah, God tried to make
He didn't, God didn't foresee that it could have been misinterpreted.
Yeah.
Well, maybe that's the key to why they were punished so deeply, is because they added a value judgment or an interpretation to what they actually saw. What they have their perception of things, and then they come to some conclusion. They come to some conclusion by using their imagination to add a value judgment to it. And we know that from the Garden of Eden story, the imagination is one feature of human beings that is a very negative feature, according to the Torah and according to most of the ancient philosophers, because the imagination sort of gets you astray from the actual phenomena. So here there's a clear use of the imagination, which draws them to a conclusion that makes them essentially afraid. Maybe that's what this whole story is about the use of imagination.
I think definitely it's easy to connect this to the story in the Garden of Eden, other moments. And it's interesting, it's the Torah. This is one of the modes of the Torah. It likes to take people and imagine that life is like takes us all to moments where either you can go left or right, right? This is a moment where you can go left or right, just like Adam and Eve. There's the snake offering them the fruit. Do you take the fruit or you do not take the fruit? And here there's a moment, another, you see the land, you see what it is. Do you say we can take it or do you say we can't take it? It's it's like you're standing on the precipice and you can go left or right, and you go left and you're going into the promised land, you go right and you lose the promised land. And it's on one hand, it feels unfair that life in this world can be like that. And yes, there's feels like there's truth to that, right? On the precipice, you look and it could be either way. It seems so flimsy, right? That's kind of what all these commentators are saying, right? It's God was trying to make it go in one direction, but their inclination, having free will is a horrible thing, because you make the wrong decision, you have to pay the price. So it's like that free will here is once again, and there's so many factors that are blowing the situation into something that's really could go either way. And it is true that imagination in our use of, right, in our moments of trying to make important decisions can take us, if we use the imagination in a negative way, right? If the imagination is building on our fear, as it often does, and building on our weaknesses rather than, one could say on the other hand that Joshua and Caleb are also using their imagination, right? They're imagining that God's going to come and help them. So they're using their imagination in a positive way. God is going to come and help us. Or maybe they're not. Maybe they're using their reason. God helped us in the past, so God will help us again. But there's something.
I think that David's point about, I'm sorry, about imagination is it reminds me of what we read in the in Maimonides in the Guide of the Perplexed, where he talks about the danger of imagination, treats it very harshly. And I don't think I had the background to understand exactly what he's talking about, but David's given a really good illustration of imagination, which we think of maybe in a more romantic sense as an admirable human capacity to imagine, to picture things that are not, and to try to bring them about one way or another. And yet it can draw you away from what you suppose is your is your goal. But without it, I wonder if we could make judgments at all, because I'm not at all sure that we can give a value-free description of things, except you can give a list of numbers, but to put meaning to them, you often have to make a decision about what's a risk worth taking.
Well,
We,
go ahead.
what we're not, what we've been talking about the negative, imagine the imagination, where they saw giants and things. They may have been imagining the fruit, the yield of the land, but we're not saying that there's anything wrong there. And it's hard to believe that they wouldn't apply their imagination. There's, these 12 spies, and they're wandering around for 40 days. They probably didn't have a heck of a lot to talk about other than what they saw, and probably feeding on each other, exaggerating the good and exaggerating the threatening aspects.
I think it feels very human. The spies feel very human. They're not, we understand where they were coming from. Maybe just like we understand Adam eating the fruit and Eve eating of the fruit.
Well, in the modern era, of course, imagination is seen as a very high level thing. We compliment people by saying they have a good imagination. This is very, very different than the ancient era, when imagination was seen as more or less a poetic thing. Not that poetry was so bad, but it created things that were way, way different from the phenomena, from the real things that were available through the senses. So, for my own personal gain from this, it's again a teaching about the imagination, about how the imagination, like for example, if you wake up, you're in the middle of the night and you're worried about something, okay? And you allow your imagination, which takes place in the middle of the night, when you don't have any sensory input of the issue that you're thinking about. So it's just imagination and reason, but mostly imagination. And you end up scaring yourself. And then you wake up and the day seems to be the usual day, and the fear usually goes away. So the play of imagination in our lives essentially has to be checked. And it's very, very difficult to do that, but it has to be checked. And maybe this is the teaching of the spies.
Or checked, at least in my mind, it has to be checked, but perhaps even better channeled, because imagination is a tool. If it runs unchecked, then it can be negative, but to dream, to even dream of the land of milk and honey in the first place, you need some imagination. And so the imagination, and I think there's a reason why in the modern era it's seen as a positive thing, because imagination is what allowed, the internet to be created, or to all kinds of, things that we imagine. We're constantly trying to imagine what isn't, and be creative in that sense. And I mean, it does lead us to negative places all the time, but also leads us to positive places. So maybe there's a difference in the ancient world where that was less the case, but in our world, imagination is part of our world, whether we like it or not. And maybe for us, it's how we can use that power of the imaginative mind and spirit. Spirit works. I think spirit comes in to some degree through the capacity of the mind to open up and imagine what isn't. Well, it's one of the ways. So there is danger there, as you said, to scare yourself or to take yourself away from the phenomenal and from the reality. And I mean, here we see the Rashi, right? And so must have been in their eyes. They were grasshoppers. We heard them say one to another, there are ants in the vineyards that look like human beings. So again, this is totally other than what the reality of phenomenal is, that they the Canaanites were talking about something totally different, and they just thought, oh, they're talking about us. They're saying we're the ants, they're saying we're the grasshoppers, and that it's I mean, it's humorous, but one can almost imagine it happening. You're in this strange land, you're listening to a foreign language, perhaps, you're trying to understand what's going on, and you're being totally misled, and then your mind and your fears and taking you to a different place. This is a comment I forgot to write, but this is Rabbi Nachman, a Hasidic leader. I haven't often brought Hasidic commentaries, but maybe in the future, if we continue, I will, because it is interesting. So he has something to say, which I think is interesting. This is also hinted at in the Torah: land that eats its inhabitants. For it's difficult to understand. Yes, it is true that the spies said something false, but how could their lie be written in the Torah, which is truth? It must therefore be that these words are an allusion to something true. And what I like about it is saying that it wasn't just, as Rashi is saying, completely out of it. There is something about this land, that it's a powerful land, right? What does it mean? It's a land that eats its inhabitants. It's a powerful land. It has a quality where you've got to beware a little bit. Now let's continue on, because I want to get to this moment. What's the moment where it all really went wrong? And Ramban and others, Bachya, are going to help us. Somebody please read for us, Ramban.
Now, our rabbis have said that day was the 9th of Av. Said the Holy One, blessed be He, they wept for no good reason. Therefore, I will establish that day as one for weeping throughout their generations. But I do not know from what allusion in this section of the Torah the rabbis deduce this interpretation. It is, however, a clearly expressed verse in the book of Psalms. Moreover, they scorned the desirable land, they believed not his word, and they murmured in their tents, they hearkened not unto the voice of the Eternal. Therefore, he swore concerning them that he would overthrow them in the wilderness, and that he would cast out their seed among the nations and scatter them in the lands.
He's pointing to this one moment, the moment of their weeping all night long. That's the moment where it all really went bad. I mean, this morning in Minyan, I was giving a little Dvar Torah because we were reading the Deuteronomy reading of this, and I was talking about, they gave into despair, right? They cried all night long, and they woke up in the morning and they started to stone Joshua and Caleb. But that's the moment where the Torah, it was in the 9th of Av, when God said, okay, I've lost faith in them. And then I didn't bring the rest of the Ramban, but he goes into a very long thing where he tries to calculate, okay, well, if they left Egypt on this date, how do you get to the 9th of Av on this date? And he makes it work in one of those beautiful rabbinic calculations. They should have been accountants, not rabbis, but they made it work to make this the 9th of Av. But let's continue. Rabbeinu Bachya. Phil, do you mind continuing, please?
Not at all. Rabbeinu Bachya, and the entire assembly raised its voice. According to the plain meaning of these words, the people commenced crying in the evening and kept crying all night long. We know that the spies had returned close to nightfall, bringing with them a special kind of darkness, similar to the one we experienced on the night of the 9th of Av, when we mourn the destruction of the temple. The prophet Jeremiah in Lamentations refers to the repeated crying of the Jewish people on that night. Midrash Echarabati points out that the dates when the people cried, mentioned by Jeremiah, coincided with the date they cried on this occasion.
So they're crying. It's like a primordial crying, right? That's what the Midrash loves to do. So the crying of the people this night links to the crying of the people in Eicha, and links to the crying in this moment and that moment, and that, right? It's alluding to a quality, a spiritual quality. So what's that special kind of darkness?
Well, the crying includes any kind of connection with the divine, I assume.
Interesting. The crying shut out the divine somehow.
Yeah.
The loss of hope, so just kind of being submerged in despair and submerged in. I mean, what's really interesting about God's reaction throughout the book is God doesn't always respond to people's words, but God responds to their states of mind, right? And I think that's at least my belief of how the divine operates. Maybe also the way a Rebbe, a teacher, is supposed to react. Of any tradition, you react not to words but to states of mind. And the state of mind of the people had gone really, really sour. Right, a whole night of crying, a whole night of despairing, of losing everything they'd been trying to build in them, all their courage, all their refinement. Right, we've been following this for weeks. Right, God was trying to build up in them. Don't follow your inclination for meat. And all of it just was lost. A whole night of them falling. And then, right, they say, let us make a captain. So understand this, as Targum says, let us appoint a chief, right? The people said, right, we're going to appoint somebody else to take us to Egypt. Let's see. Okay, so I'm going to skip this. So this is Moses and Aaron saying, don't rebel against God. Phil, please continue. I'm going a little bit quickly through this because I want to get to the end.
Are we now in the Ramban, only rebel not against the eternal?
Ramban. Right.
Thank you. This means that Moses and Aaron told the people, you are being afraid to go up because of the strength of the people that dwell in the land is in itself a rebellion against the glorious name. Deuteronomy. For it was not because of your own strength that you came out of Egypt, but it was the hand of the Eternal that hath dealt wondrously with you. And he has assured you that he will drive them out from before you. If so, believe in him and you will succeed. They, Moses and Aaron, continued, neither fear ye the people, for they are bread for us, meaning that even in the natural course of events and through normal methods of warfare as practiced in the world, they will fall before us, for the fear of us has overcome them, and they will let us consume them like bread.
That's the literal Hebrew that's used, consume them like bread. So our translation didn't have that. But now we're getting to that other section. And so I think it's, again, in my mind at least, those two voices, right, yes or no, are so externalized here in the bad spies, and then the people who are losing control, they're going completely towards the bad. And then you have this desperate attempt by Caleb and Joshua and by Moses and Aaron to try and push the people back into the other direction, right? We can feel the struggle, right? There's this huge struggle. They're no, don't do this, don't fall, don't go into the direction. And right, they say, we're going to consume them like bread. And Ramban saying, it's going to be easy. It's not going to be tough. It's going to be easy, right? And then they said, their protective shadows departed from them. So Rabbeinu Bachya, please, Phil, go ahead, read this one too.
Bachya, their protective shadow has departed from them. The protective force active on behalf of the Canaanites in the celestial regions is referred to by Caleb as shadow. This is because its function in protecting the people it represents is similar to the function of the shade, which protects against excessive heat. Basically, Caleb was telling his compatriots that the collapse of a nation on earth is preceded by the collapse of its celestial representative. This is the meaning of the men who had fallen like flies, whom the spies had seen. Caleb added the word me'alehem, I have that wrong, which can be traded as from above them, i.e., the protective force in the heavens.
So this is a Kabbalistic idea, but I think it is saying what they're saying, which is the divine is going to be with you, and even though they're powerful, you felt their spiritual stature, they're losing it because God's is great. So everything is in this moment. It's not just an internal psychological struggle, but it's also a spiritual one. It's like this is a moment where the forces of the divine conquer and take over from the shadow, and it's very and then so now what I want to do to finish up is we're going to read God's response, and then we're going to pull it up. So let's read the presence of Adonai at the meeting to all the Israelites. Would someone like to start reading the rest of the story?
where do you want it started? And Adonai said to Moses,
Yeah.
and Adonai said to Moses, how long will this people spurn me? And how long will they have no faith in me, despite all the signs that I have performed in their midst? I will strike them with pestilence and disown them, and I will make of you a nation far more numerous than they. But Moses said to Adonai, when the Egyptians, from whose midst you brought up this people in your might, hear the news, they will tell it to the inhabitants of that land. Now they have heard that you, Adonai, are in the midst of this people, that you, Adonai, appear in plain sight when your cloud rests over them, and when you go before them in a pillar of cloud by day and in a pillar of fire by night. And then you slay this people wholesale. The nations who have heard your fame will say, it must be because Adonai was powerless to bring that people into the land, promised them on oath that God slaughtered them in the wilderness. Therefore, I pray for my Lord's forbearance be great, as you have declared, saying, Adonai is slow to anger and abounding in kindness, forgiving iniquity and transgression, yet not remitting all punishment, but visiting the iniquity of parents upon children, upon the third and fourth generations. Pardon, I pray, the iniquity of this people according to your great kindness, as you have forgiven this people ever since Egypt. And Adonai said, I pardon as you have asked. Nevertheless, as I live and as Adonai's presence fills the whole world, none of those involved who have seen my presence and the signs that I have performed in Egypt and in the wilderness, and who have tried me these many times and have disobeyed me, shall see the land that I promised on oath to their fathers. None of those who scorn me shall see it. But my servant Caleb, because he was imbued with a different spirit and remained loyal to me, him I will bring into the land that he entered, and his offspring shall hold it as a possession. Now the Amalekites.
Let's stop there.
Okay, all right.
Very, very powerful, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
And Moses is an amazing leader. I love Moses in this moment. I mean, he suddenly gets up and he starts arguing with God to save the people. And, you know, what kind of God are you? People are going to say, what kind of God are you if you do this to your own people, right? It's really, and just the whole effect of it is so beautiful. It's powerful, right? It's almost like God's been hovering above, seeing this happen, and he's just, what is going to happen? And finally, the people have their last chance to turn back, and don't. And suddenly he appears and he says, what do you think? I'm watching all of this. I could have helped you, but it's too late. And then suddenly Moses, who's been talking to God in his head the whole time, is suddenly starts arguing with God to not destroy the people. And it's a very powerful, very powerful moment. Anybody have any thoughts just from reading this? Phil, it looked like you were about to say something.
I was thinking of saying.
Oh, wait. Say it again. You went in and out there.
Sorry. I always find that passage, it's very strong, but it's really in a way it's outrageous. It takes it says, God, this is bad for your public relations in the world, and look how it's going to make you look. And we have a number of other passages that are like that, but you know, that kind of appeal is later muted, I think, and people are, you know, it looks so archaic. People are embarrassed to make that kind of argument about you know, once you have abstractions about omnipotence, it's hard to bring that up. It's very human.
It's really right. It's hard for us to see God caring about his reputation, basically, about his Shem, about his name, and that would be what would suddenly sway God. But there's an internal logic to it, and in the sense, I mean, the way I shifted in my mind, which I maybe I'm not looking at it pure shot, but I'm shifting my mind, saying, well, God, you brought these. It's also saying, God, you brought these people all the way from Egypt, and now you're going to end it. It's also saying that on some level, right? It's saying you've gone all this way, and now you're going to stop it. Now you're going to destroy these people after everything you've done to come this far. That's how I'm gently reading this passage and ignoring a little bit the God, your really, you're going to allow your reputation to be muddied by this. It's where it leaves us, to me, is it leaves Moses in a very high place, right? Moses has come out of all this journey from the Red Sea in a very high, looking very good. And the people, we've seen really a series of events and a series of failures, right? They kept failing one after the other at all the different moments, from the sea, when the manna, the marah, the quail, the meat, the fire, the prophecy. The people just they struggled very much, and they just they were unable to shake it. And this, in some ways, was the most extreme example of it. Maybe because the stakes were the highest, right? The stakes were them entering the promised land or not, and God lost faith in them, and it was a big failure. And yet, there's also God did forgive them. I wanted to add, and God forgives them, right? He says he gives them a harsh punishment, but he forgives them, and he forgives in the future. God would allow another generation to enter the land, and so we feel for the people who weren't able to. But maybe I end, and maybe this occurred to me a little bit earlier, but maybe it applies to everything we've been talking about from the beginning, which is this was how it needed to happen. I'm not talking about their failures, but the manna, them learning, entering this land, it was stronger. And it's all about what we were talking about earlier. What could they choose, whether they feared God or not, whether they had faith or not. And the way Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach, who created a lot of great melodies, had other issues, but also had very interesting Torah. And this is one of his Torahs, which I do resonate with, and which I've mentioned before, I'm sure, from the Bima. But at the end of this Parsha, how does this Parsha end, this big Parsha of failure? God gives them the tzitzit, right? God gives the commandment of having tzitzit to look at, and the tzitzit are supposed to remind you of the commandments. So a big thing that Shlomo Carlebach used to talk about is all of life is, do you have snake eyes or tzitzit eyes, right? So how do you look at life? Do you have the eyes where you see possibility, you see divine will, you see, the ability the tzitzit also have the thread of blue, right? So do you see expansion, or do you see everything is, negative, everything is fearful, everything is terror inducing, everything is causing you to you're seeing yourself as a grasshopper. And that's maybe one place, one lesson that we get from all of that, which is how do we walk in the world, the tzitzit eyes or the snake eyes?
Very good.
Good thought to end with.